Sam Lee has not only been transformative to the world of folk music and being nominated for a Mercury Prize along the way, he's also been an incredible catalyst for change in the environmental space, not just as a campaigner on the ground, but also as a founder of Music Declares Emergency, co-founding the campaign No Music on a Dead Planet, famously supported by the likes of Billie Eilish and Radiohead. Sam, it's great to have you on AimHi. Welcome.
Thank you, Matthew. It's great to be here in my matching t-shirt with Fred.
So Sam, you have always seemed to me to be someone constantly on an adventure. Can you share with everyone what you were doing in Romania at the end of the summer?
Well, in that little bit of the year when we kind of could go away and do some international travel, having no gigs and no career to worry about, I went over to the Southern Carpathians, which is a part of the world I've been to once before when I was much younger, but to go and discover the work being done with WWF in rewilding bison. And I went and joined up with some trackers and some wilderness guides, and we did a bit of a skill sharing journey on tracking bison and wolves and bears and lynx, and looking at the mosaic of habitats there in the Southern Carpathians, where the rewilded European bison have been released and are doing incredible ecosystem management there. So yeah, I was out in the mountains.
You said that there was like an amazing moment, right? When the scientist that you were with had like this wow experience of, what was that?
Well, they've been releasing bisons over the last kind of few years, and you have like an 80% chance of not seeing a bison. And we were there out in this it's virgin beech forest, so it's one of the last untouched wildernesses of Europe, and Romania has a large percentage of that. And then all of a sudden there was this kind of sound, this sense of being, and a herd of about 40 bison poured down the mountainside, right surrounding us. And these guys I was with, they trap bison all year round. That's their job. They'd never seen anything like it. All these males buffing these little baby calves, and they're all like spraying their urine scent and musk all over the ground around us, and it was phenomenal. It was a real like Jurassic Park moment.
You were at the same protest that I was at, the Extinction Rebellion protest. What the dickens were you doing there, Sam?
Well, I've been a long time supporter of XR. I was there right the very, very first declaration back in 2018. And I've always been very aligned and supportive of their beliefs, and to a certain extent their tactics as well. For me, XR have brought to the surface something that, as somebody who's worked in wilderness work for much of my life, way before I was ever doing music, was really inspired by a campaign that was bringing community and stylish designs and a real vocalization of the importance of environmental protection, and actually how much ecosystem loss and a loss of biodiversity is the loss of our lives and well-being in the long term. And connecting that in with nature for me was such a relief to have that welded, as opposed to just this external climate somewhere up where the clouds are, or in, parts, sort of lack of rain, these sort of existential things that don't seem to affect us. And actually biodiversity is something that a lot of us are really in love with. We love a good cheetah or a panda, and the idea that there would be less of these things, or that, we would be complicit in their demise and destruction of their habitat, and that's these species. So that's why I was at XR, and also I love a good gathering. They're great parties.
How did your music turn into activism?
I think I was always an activist to start off with, and what I realized was that I hadn't found my way of vocalizing that passion, that concern. I discovered my voice, and I discovered being able to making music was what I could do. And as I've honed that, I've realised that actually the music has become the vessel through which the activism comes. So I'm very much first and foremost an activist, and just music is my banner, as it were.
I know that there's more to ask you about there in terms of collecting, but let's move on to Fred. I'm going to hand over to Fred because I know that Fred's going to ask you some of these kinds of questions.
Sam, can you just talk to us a little bit about song collecting and kind of why it's important, because it's a slightly dying art?
Well, song collecting is a little bit like going out species finding. The musical material held within communities, within oral tradition, within cultures that have passed down through ancient lines of generation to generation, the music of those communities. And they are in many ways like the species that we see that have evolved, branching off from one species into another. And we, once upon a time, not that very many years back, lived in a time where there was no recorded music and all music was self-made and passed down orally, and only certain prestigious musics would be written down. And so we lived in this incredible world of diverse variations of unique styles, and Britain has a huge, enormous and incredible legacy of oral folk song, traditional folk song. And that basically has disappeared almost entirely. It's disappearing across the world at exactly the same rate, steep curve as biodiversity loss, because cultural diversity loss is happening totally in accordance through many of the same reasons. And I, in my early 20s, was fascinated with this idea that Britain didn't have any oral culture left. All the experts were saying it didn't exist. And I, being a hot-headed 20-year-old, was like, there's got to be some people out there who still remember the old songs, and was quite adamant. And all the experts and academics in the libraries were going, no, it's all on wax cylinders and field recordings in the library, and it's preserved in wax and aspic and jars pinned like the butterflies. And I was like, I want to go out and find it. So I put my rucksack on my back. Song collecting is the act of going out and finding people who still remember those songs and stories. And it's not just songs, but that legacy, that ancient repertoire, and remember it from their family's version, which often is unique, or they'll remember songs that nobody else in the entire world still remembers, or is alive who remembers it. So that's what song collecting is. It's going out and recording and documenting the remains of that culture.
We got a lot of people saying no, that they didn't know what song collecting was, but one person said, is it like Matty Groves? And I don't know what they meant by that.
Go on, Fred, do you know that song?
Yeah, well, mainly I've done quite a lot of work with Ashley Hutchins more recently. So for Old Fairport Convention. So they do a famous version of that song, and they're a big. He's done a lot of work about Cecil Sharp, and Cecil Sharp was obviously probably the most well-known collector in this country, and there's a big library of folk songs in Camden, at Cecil Sharp House, which I'm sure Sam has spent a lot of time in.
How does the Library of Songs work?
It's a big old dusty building with a library in it, and it's got shelves and shelves of songbooks, because when these songs were first collected by Cecil Sharp, who was like the famous Victorian song collector, like we had Charles Darwin collecting species, and Captain Cook going out discovering islands and cultures. Cecil Sharp was going out to find English folk songs such as Matty Groves, and many other of the 400,000 different folk songs there are in the English language. And those are now all kept in safe quarters in Cecil Sharp House, the house named after Cecil Sharp in Camden. And also the British Library and the National Sound Archive have the entire repertoire of everything that's been collected there for safekeeping, so that we have public access to listen to our intangible cultural heritage.
There are people asking on the chat, can anyone visit this place? Is there a place that we can go to? Because lots of people seem to want to go.
You totally can, obviously not now, but actually the brilliant thing, the library is called the Vaughan Williams Memorial Library. And Vaughan Williams was the very famous British classical composer who also went out and was part of the first folk revival, collected folk songs to use within, as it was, the first collections of folk songs happened actually because the British was so worried about our classical repertoire, our output, mimicking the European styles. So we thought, well, we have to go back and look at what our indigenous native music sounds like to use as inspiration. So Vaughan Williams and many others went out collecting, finding these beautiful modal tunes that got turned into the Lark Ascending and, you know, Brig Fair, and some of the most famous classical repertoire, most popular, all came from traditional music to start off with. And you can go and hear them in the library, or you go on their website, and a vast amount is online, digitized, so you can hear it there. Or Spotify. A lot of the sound recordings are now on Spotify.
You said a really nice thing when we had a chat a couple of days ago about how that song collecting then kind of linked into your activism work a little bit. You said a really nice analogy.
I think what I should preface is by saying that, so I went out and did song collecting, which was entirely with the Gypsy Traveller community, the Irish Travellers, the Scottish Travellers and the English Gypsies, who are the largest British ethnic minority who are indigenous to these lands. The Irish and Scots Travellers have been here for thousands of years, pre-Celtic. The English Gypsies arrived about 600 years ago, and they have been the last custodians of this material. And I spent about 15 years and quite extensively going and finding all the old people within that community and recording as much music and story and plant lore and folklore that I could, and we'll play you a little film, but I have an online archive with much of the thousands of hours of material that I've recorded, and these incredible elders, wisdom keepers. Unfortunately, as time has gone on, I now go out there and I go and knock on people's doors to see them again, and they've passed away, and with them goes that incredible relationship to that music. So for a song that is 1,000 years old, which some of the songs I record are, that's it. That song has died. It's like looking at extinction happening there, sonic extinction. And it got to this point where I was spending weeks of my life going out to Ireland, traveling around Ireland, and it would be heartbreaking work. And at the same time, the environmental movement was really getting going. And I suddenly realized I'm putting all this energy into trying to save a music. And it's like, but we're all ruined. And should I really not be focusing more of my attention in terms of environmental campaigning? And actually, the two are really linked. And I kind of looked at it a little bit like this idea that the disappearance of this culture is totally linked with disappearance of diversity. And that it's a bit like the house is on fire. This world is on fire. And I'm rushing into this little room in this house. And there's a little cupboard, a little drawer. And I'm trying to rescue these jewels, these cultural jewels. And I'm like, well, hold on. Why shouldn't I be trying to put the whole house out? But in many ways, what I realized is these songs are super powerful in terms of what their purpose is in trying to tell the story of what we are losing through this rampant capitalist consumption of planetary resources. And actually folk song, which is so stunning and unique and free and raw and elemental, is, as it disappears, it's being replaced by trash and crap and plasticky music. So I'm using it as a way of saying, hold on, think about what's in this, the wisdom that's in these songs. They're so full of ancient knowledge and things that are really relevant for what we're about to go through, environmentally speaking.
A lot of people think that there are no source singers left of very old songs, but we knew that that wasn't the case, and we wanted to allow these people to share those songs. So we quite simply went out and started making recordings of singers throughout Britain and Ireland, particularly those from the Irish and Scottish traveller communities, who have otherwise unknown songs and unknown knowledge about those songs. We got support from the Arts Council of Ireland, which allowed us to build a bespoke website to share the recordings and create profile pages to give credit to the singers, or tradition bearers as we term them. We also make copies of the recordings. We give those back to the communities on CD, as well as publishing them through various social media sites. And we organise regular performances and education events to encourage people to make their own field recordings. In just a few short years, we have recorded dozens and dozens of singers and published recordings of hundreds of songs. However, we are pretty sure that we're still at the beginning of this project.